Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. So welcome to another episode of the Market Access podcast. Today we have a quite special topic. We're speaking about environmental considerations around HTA. It's a quite broad, but still new field. And I'm quite happy to have Gerdi Strydom as well as part of our discussion. I think, Gerdi, we know already a bit longer, but maybe not everybody listening to the podcast knows maybe you as well. So if you could introduce quickly yourself, and then we can jump as well a bit into the discussions, into the new discussions around maybe HTA.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Gerdi Strydom. I'm the Managing Director at Valid Insight. I have a background in pharmacy. That's where I started my career, and I soon fell in love with market access and dedicated my career to that. So I started in a payer environment, then I moved into big pharma, biotech startups, and consulting. And this was where I find myself now. My interest in environmental sustainability probably started a couple of years ago, both at home, but also looking at how we could contribute in a broader way in our professional lives as well. And Valid Insight has also been involved in this debate since about 2022, when we started publishing some papers and doing some work in the field. So that's why I'm here today.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks also for the quick introduction. So I think you're probably already up. I mean, you're working with your team as well on the topic. Let's say it's a broad topic, right? But it's still quite new. I think you mentioned since around 2020, 2021, something like that. So 3-4 years old. So what is it all about? I think, especially when we think about, let's say, environmental considerations, such as carbon footprint, generally sustainability, as you mentioned already, it's quite broad. But we as well work in the area of health technology assessment, which is being used for payer decisions. So there are let's say, more kind of national submissions with dossiers, but there's also more on a regional or even local basis tenders. Is there anything where you think there's already a bit of a move, or are there any discussions already, especially also from a payer's perspective?
Yes, let's dive into that. So it's really a timely topic, I think, and it's growing in importance. The reason for that is globally, the healthcare sector is responsible for around 4.6% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And that's as of 2020. And that's actually surpassing the earlier estimates. So the time for action is now. And this includes the emissions from the entire life cycle of the product, from the raw materials extraction right through to disposal of the product at the end of its life. So given the significant environmental impact of healthcare, countries across Europe are beginning to incorporate sustainability into their HTA processes and into payer instruments. So the roadmap for healthcare decarbonisation has identified several high-impact actions, such as transitioning to 100% renewable energy in production, investing in zero-emission buildings and transportation, etc., and also promoting low-carbon pharmaceuticals. Now, integrating environmental sustainability into payer decision-making is crucial for promoting low-carbon pharmaceuticals, and it can be achieved through established methods such as procurement policies and HTA guidelines. You asked if we're seeing that happening. Yes, Nordic countries are leading the way by incorporating environmental certification into their joint tendering process demonstrating a shift towards prioritizing sustainability in public health procurement. In the UK, sustainability criteria have been woven into the procurement process, with the NHS committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2045. And in a recent analysis by Valid Insight and Cube RM of biosimilar tenders across Europe, a greater proportion of tenders were found to incorporate environmental impact into tender award criteria in recent years. And this shift from a purely cost-driven tendering to most economically advanced tender criteria or MEET criteria, which includes environmental factors, is a significant step. It signals a step in the right direction. And this allows healthcare decision makers to easily compare health technologies with similar clinical outcomes, but different environmental impact. Now, if you look at HTA frameworks, which is slightly different, it's still evolving. And there's no internationally or nationally agreed framework for measuring an environmental impact across healthcare sectors. And although it's still in its early stages, bodies like NICE and CADIF are leading the way by adapting their strategies to include environmental data into their evaluations. So, for example, CADIF's strategy for 2025 explicitly aims to integrate environmental sustainability into their HTAs, and they're actually testing various methodologies. Equally, NICE's strategy for 2026 includes provisions to include environmental impact data in health technology evaluations, showing this growing trend towards integrating environmental sustainability in decision-making processes. And lastly, I think another example is the JCA guidelines, which also lists environmental considerations as a potential dimension within the HTA core model. And that signifies the potential for low-carbon pharmaceuticals to have their environmental benefit included in these assessments in the future. And while it's still in its early days, this integration of the environmental sustainability into healthcare decision-making is expected to grow as methodologies evolve. And we know that it takes quite a lot of time and effort for companies to get to that point, to have a low-carbon pharmaceutical. So the time is now to start with it while the methodologies are evolving. And by the time it's fully implemented, you'll be ready for it.
Exactly. I think thanks for that quite broad, ready overview. I think also with the different kind of, let's say, leading institutions and the pieces, things currently being happening. I think interestingly, I mean, what I basically take out of it is the kind of HTA environment might shift to have the environmental, let's say, part of it as another item for decision making, besides effectiveness, safety, cost effectiveness, budget impact, whatever you want to add, right? And also depending a bit on the jurisdiction and the payer type. I mean, when we maybe go even a step further, right? We have everything together. The data might be there. We're coming back to the kind of potential issues in a couple of minutes. But just thinking about the kind of decision-making process, so payers might decide on all of those different kind of items, including environmental issues in a way, right? Or data. A big discussion currently is also and around equitable kind of access, right? So the social kind of aspect. What do you see there, or what would you foresee probably, because we don't see it yet, right? When taking as well the social aspect into consideration, because ultimately we've seen those discussions as well in the past when, UK NICE has not approved a drug because of a cost effectiveness threshold, which has not been applied in other countries, right? So the drug was available. So we might see similar kind of issues potentially there. Are you having those discussions? Do you see something like that? That this is maybe just an additional item, or might that as well be a kind of another debate we might have in the future?
I think that the social component of ESG is highly integrated into the whole ESG framework. So you can't talk about the ESG without deeply looking at social impact, and each has a vice versa impact on each other. So integrating this equity is really integral to the overall ESG assessment. As we move towards a more sustainable healthcare system, it's more important to measure that new environmental measures do not widen existing healthcare disparities, especially if you're looking at more developing economies. Tools like a health equity impact assessment, for example, help policymakers to evaluate how a new program or a new technology might affect different population groups. And this ensures that access to care remains equitable, even as sustainability practices are implemented. It's particularly important for vulnerable populations who may be at a greater risk of being left behind as the wealthier nations adopt low-carbon health technologies. And decarbonisation efforts must be combined with promoting health equity, but also building that climate resilience, ensuring that all populations can benefit from low-carbon healthcare systems without necessarily replicating the carbon-intensive systems of the past.
That makes a lot of sense. While we speak already a bit around, let's say, implementing sustainability, environmental sustainability into the HTA process, what would be kind of steps or governance frameworks in HTA where you think these should and must be adopted maybe to have those items on top of effectiveness, safety, cost effectiveness? And how could that, let's say, be seen in reality? I mean, is it rather kind of a score? Would we have, again, another kind of threshold? Or would we maybe go back even to a kind of weighting kind of assessment overall? Or is it maybe just simply another item in the whole kind of negotiation framework? How would you see that?
The debate is still ongoing and various methodologies are being looked at, evaluated, and there's basically two different ways of looking at it. It's either in parallel, that you look at environmental sustainability and normal HTA processes, and at the end then have a look at comparing the two, or integrating it. But it all starts with actually conducting the environmental impact assessment. So one methodology for assessing environmental impacts, for example, the life cycle assessment, or LCA, which provides a comprehensive evaluation of a product's environmental impact. And several approaches then can be used. Like I said, it's either being methods used to incorporate the LCA into the HTA. Lots of tongue-tying acronyms.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, the two potential processes are parallel or integrated. So in a parallel evaluation, your environmental outcome is assessed alongside the health and the cost outcomes. Mm-hmm. But it's not integrated into one single metric like a QALY or something. This allows the decision maker to consider the environmental sustainability in a deliberate process, and then have a transparent system where trade-offs between the environmental and the health outcomes could be made. And that could be via consensus panels or multi-criteria decision analysis, for example. The other method is an integrated evaluation, where it involves fully incorporating environmental impact into the HTA itself by developing statistical methods or models that synthesize the clinical, financial, and environmental information into the single quantitative analysis. And this could include adapting existing methods, such as the cost of utility analysis, where you can factor in the environmental cost and outcomes, or using something like cost-benefit analysis, where the environmental outcome is monetized, so you count the carbon. Incorporating ESG criteria into the HTA governance frameworks, however, requires a careful balancing of the efficiency and the added complexity, because it's quite challenging to deal with these quite different measurements in existing HTAs. So it's crucial to refine these processes so that the sustainability component, rather than compromise decision efficiency, actually complements it. And there's some discussions, if you can't do it immediately, you can't roll out a whole new process of assessing these things. And like you and I were laughing earlier, we said many years ago, health economics won't work, it's too difficult to make and too difficult to do, and then we solved for it. And joint clinical assessments won't happen, or joint assessments won't happen. And here we are, we're rolling it out. And it's being rolled out in a phased approach, starting with the most difficult ones to tackle. So you could potentially look at environmental sustainability from that perspective and say, let's look at the pharmaceuticals or technologies that are known to have the highest impact and see how we can score them, measure them, and assess them in order to then develop the right methodology. So you could also have this triage system, similar to how the JCA is working, that you roll it out in a phased approach instead of just saying environmental sustainability is now the new thing. Let's all go and just adapt it.
Yeah, and maybe we might even see it, let's say, differently handled in different jurisdictions, right? And when you were just speaking about, let's say, having it integrated with statistical methods, etc., I was more maybe thinking around, let's say, systems like the UK, right? Just coming from the health economic, from the cost effectiveness area, and then maybe the kind of more multi-decision criteria approach that's maybe more the kind of French or German kind of approach, right? So there might maybe not even be the kind of way, not even thinking about, let's say, having the JCA as a European approach versus then going national versus regional, going local. I think that's maybe as well a bit of the difficulty to keep in mind as well, right? Within a country, that you would not overcomplicate it and just have another hurdle for the companies, right?
That's true. It's a very valid point. If you look also at environmental impacts, just looking at the start of the process, if you're looking at the different scopes 1, 2, and 3, looking at transportation in Germany is different to transportation in Canada. So can you compare the systems and have the same system to measure impact? No, you can't. So I think for the time being, it would be quite local, as in local in per country, to try and find also collaboration is possible, but find a country that has a similar type of setup where the environmental impact would be similar. Otherwise, if you measure it at the end in an HTA and your baseline impact is different, then you may sit with an unwanted outcome. So yeah, that's very important. It's quite different based on the infrastructure of the healthcare system, what the total environmental impact would be.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. Obviously, keep thinking about, let's say, the kind of characteristics of a country. Taking maybe Switzerland versus, I don't know, Sweden versus, obviously, you just brought the big kind of, let's say, difference into Canada or the US, right? Where, let's say, the differences between, let's say, cities are just so different, right? If we have a long trip in Europe, we're probably speaking about, I don't know, maybe 6 hours or 7 hours of a car drive, right? But that's nothing in North America. So that's the big difference when we speak about just transportation. And this is just one item of the whole kind of life cycle, as you have just described as well a bit before.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. Getting a bit away from, we've heard a lot of, I would rather say, hurdles and issues and difficulties, and keeping in mind what you have as well said, and as you said as well, we have just laughed about it a bit before. We said the same about health economics and a couple of other things, but I know that some companies are already, let's say, driving that way, right? Trying to be, let's say, carbon neutral, putting different measures into place, etc. Can you share a couple of examples, if you are not allowed to let's say, mention company names, not a problem, but just that everybody who's listening gets a bit of an understanding what can be done now already, because as you said, it might take a long way. What might be maybe the kind of little successes you see already early on, and probably also throughout that kind of, let's say, maybe also call it life cycle to implement such measures.
Yeah, certainly. So I'll mention everything that's in the public domain of what companies are doing. And you can look at it within the 3 scopes. So scope 1 and 2 is much more in control of the pharmaceutical manufacturer or technology manufacturer, while scope 3 is really looking at their suppliers. So there's efforts across all of these. And the pharmaceutical industry is really being recognized for its leadership in embracing these sustainabilities into their strategic imperatives. Leading firms are then adopting science-based carbon reduction targets to curb these emissions across these 3 scopes. in order to improve their ESG performance. And we see that happening. So examples, companies are integrating it into their business operations, from reducing energy, looking at their manufacturing plants, renewable energy, minimizing waste in their manufacturing processes, re-looking at packaging, removing PVCs out of their packaging, for example, optimizing the size of the package. It's as easy as that. Do you need this bigger bottle, or can it be smaller? So improving on all of those facets, but also urging their suppliers, which is the largest contributing to global greenhouse gases for pharmaceutical companies, and that sits in scope 3. So working with their suppliers to urge them to conform to ESG requirements. So companies are setting these targets for achieving net zero emissions, and most of them have the SBTI approved short-term and long-term emission strategies. And for those that's not familiar with the terminology, SBTI is Science-Based Targets Initiative. It's really judging whether the corporate emission targets are enough to limit global warming to 2%. And initiatives like AstraZeneca's Ambition Zero Carbon and GSK's Path to Zero target net zero by 2045. And that shows that industry leaders are taking proactive steps to decarbonization their operations. It's just a few of many companies that are investing in sustainable processes. Mm-hmm. And although the fully integrating these principles into the HTA outcomes is still evolving, companies that invest in environmental sustainability are likely to benefit as these criteria are increasingly adopted. So it takes immense time to change, for example, a gas within a production system, or change your whole production facility to have lower carbon emissions. So there's also opportunities for collaboration. So what we see is, to come to mind, Activate and Energize within the pharmaceutical industry. So Activate, for example, is an initiative to reduce the emissions from API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and it's supported by AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, GSK, J&J, Pfizer, and Sanofi. And they collaborate together to reduce that, which is in scope 3 because they buy the API. And then Energize is another example, looking at collaboration between a power company and 10 pharmaceutical companies. And here it allows these pharmaceutical companies to participate in the market for power purchase agreements. And what is that? It's basically an agreement where you purchase clean energy from a supplier at a predetermined price. Mm-hmm. And usually that's only for governments to do. So pharmaceutical companies have had this agreement with the power companies. So it just shows you the innovation that's taking place. It's not just looking at the end product, but how does that product get to the end user? These are some of the examples that spring to mind.
Yeah, perfect. Obviously, I mean, if I listen to you, I think it's probably especially still driven by more kind of intrinsic motivations by industry leaders, I guess, by companies, perceptions for companies, etc. But I think at the end of the day, I think you said as well early on in our discussion, there are at least some incentives already given around local tenders. I mean, we could also think, obviously, we could at least think of having maybe in the future as well further incentives in terms of maybe a price premium or other kind of special arrangements. I mean, we have just seen that now recently in Germany, not around environmental, but it was more around local investments. If you have, let's say, or if you're investing into research in Germany, plus having a good number of your study participants out of Germany, you might get a kind of, maybe call it special pathway in the price negotiation. We could obviously as well think about something like that in the future, which still comes back probably to the point what you also mentioned once or twice, which is more kind of collaboration, right? What I don't see really yet. I mean, we have discussions on a policy level. Obviously, we have all the kind of Green Deal in mind. We need to see how this will move forward now with the new kind of, let's say, European, in quotes, government. But I mean, if we think about real collaboration, we would really need to think about not only policymakers on a European level, also on a national level. We need to think about health technology institutions, HTA bodies in general, but also obviously around the industry. Do you see anything like that currently happening, at least maybe around the leading companies and the leading institutions/countries?
Yes, I think you mentioned on the policy front that we see the collaboration already. I think looking at the pharmaceutical industry, as I mentioned, these intercompany and inter-industry initiatives already show some collaboration to drive this agenda forward. But when we look at the payer bodies, we know that there are collaborations speaking around joint negotiations, HTA assessment, and data sharing. So the discussion around the methodology for adapting HTAs is already happening cross-border, shall I say, with similar agencies that share similar processes. So while we see that it's still in the early ages or early stages, we know that if ESG becomes a shared objective, that these best methodologies to incorporate ESG into decision-making processes will evolve, and that will drive this imperative to actually work together. So it's really the shared objective needs to be more explicitly discussed in order to find commonalities within systems and talk to each other. I think we've seen that the payers already can do it. They've done it with Benelux, Finnos, JCA, etc. So it's not new, and it's just another element for those that have already recognized similarities in their system to further collaborate with one additional dimension. And I always call ESG kind of this fifth dimension. We always spoke about economic evaluations as the fourth hurdle. So I think this is not a hurdle. I think ESG is really a dimension. And you can see that these agencies are looking at this dimension together. So NICE and CADIF and discussion around how to share that data. There's scoping documents being published in the public domain so that you can see NICE is thinking this is how they're going to do it, and then the rest can collaborate around that. So it's really in its infancy, but it's starting to show progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very, very interesting. We're moving towards the end, and I think we have spoken a lot about, let's say, the start, initiating, the future. Where would you see HTA and ESG maybe by 2030, which is in a bit more than 5 years? We've heard it a couple of times, the 2025 kind of timeline, which is basically tomorrow, which was, however, very specific to some companies. But I think if we maybe have a look on the overall system, on HTA systems, processes, etc., where and how would you maybe see the combination by 2030?
I think just looking at the targets that has been set. So the pharmaceutical industry has these targets and like net zero in 2045, but the payoff in terms of the payer decision making, that's not set. However, and separately, HTA agencies, as part of a national health system, has the same targets. And most of them target 2040, 2045. So 2030 is early days, I think. We would hope that by then we would start with I would call it the low-hanging fruit of tenders. I think it's the easiest way to not add that much complexity, especially looking at drugs with the same or similar clinical outcomes. That would probably be an easy place to start implementing it. And we see that already happening. It's just that it's in a very small minority, and that price only is still the majority of tender criteria. And as you mentioned earlier on, maybe there could be a payoff. My argument is maybe the environmental, a higher price for environmental, sustainable or low carbon pharmaceuticals. My answer is that potentially you would reap that reward even if you pay a few cents more per dose by getting the ESG input. So recognizing that it's not just the price, a ticket on the item, but the overall impact and how that helps a country to achieve its sustainability targets is probably a bigger picture kind of view. And I hope that we can progress past just the ticket on the product to think about the broader implications. And start looking at the environmental impact as a cost and a saving, even if the price is different. So I think it's easy to start with tenders, relatively easy. If you compare it to HTAs, I think that's the more challenging one. And that's where we would need to collaborate with environmental scientists and academics to help HTA bodies, because it's not within their scope of expertise, to start collaborating there and start understanding what kind of methodologies and what kind of measurements could be used. And that is what I would like to see in the next 5 years, is that we actually start testing those methodologies, forming those collaborations, so that by 2030 we are ready to actually start thinking about how can we incorporate that into some HTA methodologies. And yet again, having then maybe a triage system to start with items that we know have the highest carbon impact, and see how we could look at them from a system-wise perspective, not just from the single drug and the moment that it's utilized, but the overall system impact. So I think that's probably hopefully achievable in the next 5 to 6 years, is to get that collaboration going, the methodologies tested, and working alongside academics in environmental sustainability to get to that point.
Perfect. I think that's a good kind of outlook. Thank you again, Gerdi, for your insights. A lot of, I think, also more new pieces, new parts to be thinking of around the future of HTA, the future of, let's say, maybe payor decisions in general, and obviously around the industry. That was great insight. Thank you, Gerdi.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
ESG is a very broad theme, obviously, but Gerdi and I have just brought it down to the impact on the pharmaceutical industry, and especially, obviously, around health technology assessment. Maybe keep it in mind, I think these are the early days. I think Gerdi said that as well a couple of times. But ultimately, if you compare it with health economic measures, cost effectiveness, cost per quality, or the same with the JCA, the Joint Clinical Assessment, I think we have maybe all discussed many years ago and just all concluded, obviously rightly, that this is and was not doable to be implemented. Now we have both of those. So that might be maybe the same kind of thing with the ESG or general with the environmental sustainability. Keep also in mind, health economics is just, let's say, using the same method as, for example, environmental economics. And these methods have even been used much earlier than in health economics. So I think how this would really look like, how this is maybe being implemented into health technology assessment, especially the decision-making process, that needs to be seen. Pretty much sure that these will as well look differently between different jurisdictions, which also make a lot of sense. I think we discussed briefly about the example between, for example, transportation within a country of Canada and maybe a country like Germany or Switzerland. Anyhow, and ultimately, if these, let's say, environmental items, measures should be taken into consideration to account for the healthcare decision-making process, there needs as well to be incentives. And maybe, as we see it already in some jurisdictions, this would be implemented firstly around tenders, and then maybe also later on, like it is also implemented with other measures, around price premiums. Let's see it and try to keep up to date with our MAP Market Access podcast and subscribe with your favorite podcast platform. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.